Hey losers, welcome back to a new episode here at Zero Loser Studio. Today we're going to have another chit chat video, and today's topic is going to be handhelds. Are we finally reaching the end of an era to handheld consoles? Well, let's rewind a little bit. Let's look at the history of handhelds. With the release of the Game Boy in 1989, Nintendo has found so much success in the handheld world. For basically 32 years, Nintendo has dominated the handheld market. I mean, we've seen other companies try to dive into that pool of success when it comes to handheld consoles. For example, Bandai's WonderSwan, and then the Sega's Game Gear, which, by the way, that thing, could you even categorize that as a handheld? That thing was so big and thick, that was a brick. It was a brick, okay? The Game Gear, though, was discontinued in 1997 due to the lack of support from Sega, any games that were ported over to it, and, well, the battery life was horrible. I mean, that thing was big and it sucked up the battery life like crazy. And then WonderSwan never really left the Japanese market. It was exclusive to the East and Americans never saw it, so it obviously didn't sell that much and it got discontinued in 2003. So with Sega and the WonderSwan out of the way, we just have Nintendo as king of all the handheld consoles. And that's just how it was for a few years. Like stated, Nintendo just dominated the whole handheld market. And of course, as technology advanced, Nintendo dropped different versions of the Game Boy. The Game Boy Color dropped in the fall of 1998. And, well, you guessed it, it's just the Game Boy, but in color. Like, it just plays your Game Boy games, but in color. Then a few years later, in 2001, we got the Game Boy Advance. It's supposed to be a faster and more improved and more compact version of the Game Boy Color. But unfortunately, it was pretty infamous for the really dark screen. I mean, you could not see what you were doing when you were playing the Game Boy Advance. I remember I had a Game Boy Advance and you had to buy this little attachment, this little light attachment, looks like a book light reader, to even see what you're doing, and that kind of caused a lot of problems for the system. Nintendo finally saw that issue when they released the Game Boy Advance SP in 2003. And this is Nintendo's introduction to their famous clamshell design for their handheld consoles. The SP had the backlit, finally. It took them long enough. And it was cute. It was smaller than the Game Boy Advance. And of course we have the Micro. That one I think came out a year or two later afterwards. It was cute. I remember I wanted one so bad, but my parents were like, no, we got you the Game Boy Advance. What's the difference? It plays the same games. They didn't understand the whole backlit thing. They thought it was just being extra. But I'm like, it's important. I have to see what I'm doing. And of course, Nintendo always likes to progress when technology progresses. As time went on, touchscreen has become a thing, and Nintendo really wanted to implement that in their handheld consoles. Thus, the creation of the DS. The DS was born in 2004, and man did it blow everyone's mind when it was introduced in E3.
Well, the wait is over. This is Nintendo DS.
That same year, Sony decided to enter the competition, and they unveiled the PSP. Honestly, compared to the OG DS, the PSP was really nice and sleek looking and a lot smaller than the OG DS. I mean, look at that thing. That thing was thick. I mean, it's pretty ugly, no offense. A lot of people predicted that Sony was going to dethrone Nintendo when it came to the handheld consoles. Sony was already killing it with the home console market, and Sony already entered the competition with the handheld, so everyone was like, look up, Nintendo. Sony's coming in hot. But to everyone's surprise, Nintendo kept their crown and eventually ended up selling more units than the PSP. Don't get me wrong, the PSP did well. It sold a lot of units. When the PS Vita came out, that's when things slowly started to crash from there. There was a lack of support from Sony itself, and there wasn't a lot of developers that were making games for the Vita. And another thing that I personally think is a fatal flaw is the PS Vita SD card. You couldn't just buy any SD card like the Switch. You actually had to purchase a specific SD card for the PS Vitas. They were pretty expensive, and a lot of people kind of got turned off from that. I would be too. Why should I buy this expensive component to this console? It should be accessible to anybody. So that's what I personally think led to the Vita's downfall. And of course, Sony slowly stopped marketing their handhelds and started focusing more on the home consoles. During that time, the PS4 was also being released, and that was like their home run done right there with the PS4. Like, they were running with that thing and they just left the PS Vita and PSP back there. They're like, I don't care. PS4, take us home. And I mean, it did. Slowly but surely after time, the PSP discontinued in 2014 and the PS Vita discontinued in 2019. And honestly, that's not too bad. The PSP had about a 10-year lifespan and the PS Vita had about an 8-year lifespan. And that's pretty common with consoles. They usually, each generation has about 8 to 10 years, sometimes even 7, just depending on how well or how bad the console sells. I guess Sony was just like, nah, this ain't for us. We're just gonna focus on home consoles. Thus, leaving Nintendo to still be the king of all handheld consoles. Also during this time, Nintendo decided to go ahead and focus their shift from the DS and introduce the 3DS. And man, did they make a ton of different 3DSs. I mean, let me go ahead and list them off for you, okay? And try to keep up. So we have the OG 3DS, the 3DS XL, the 2DS, new 3DS, new 3DS XL, and then finally we have the new 2DS XL. That's a lot. That's a lot of different variations of a handheld. I can see how that can be very like overwhelming for buyers. I just want one. I just want one and one thing. Like don't give me all these options. That's crazy. But I guess as technology advanced, Nintendo still wanted to push their handheld hardware. So they just implemented these different variations of the 3DS to fit in this new technology, which I guess makes sense. You know, it's kind of like phones. As technology progresses, you're going to get like iPhone 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And same thing with the Samsung. You're going to have the same thing, but it's going to be improved. So I guess I see what they were coming from, but still, it can be a bit confusing. Also, around the time of the 3DS era, the Wii U came out in 2012, and that's when we started to finally notice that Nintendo is actually trying to merge handheld and home consoles. Unfortunately, it didn't really work out with the Wii U. I mean, it sold well, but it didn't have a lot of games, and a lot of people weren't really into the outdated tablet form. The thing was also pretty chunky, and it wasn't like a, oh my god, it was just kind of like, oh, the Wii U. Cool. And then finally, they perfected the formula. In 2017, we got the Switch. Nintendo finally got the product that they wanted. They finally were able to merge that home console and that handheld together when they made the Switch. And of course, with the release of the Switch comes the question, what's gonna happen to the future of the 3DS? It's clear that Nintendo kind of wants the Switch to replace the 3DS, right? I mean, they made a console that you can hook up to the TV and then take it with you. So it left a lot of buyers to think, well, what's the point of 3DS then? And fans of the 3DS handhelds were questioning, what will Nintendo do to top the 3DS? The answer to that question is the Switch Lite. The Switch Lite was released in September of 2019, and it plays, well, I guess the entirety of the Switch library, except maybe 1 or 2 games that requires you to have the Joy-Cons to move around. But other than that, you can basically play like all the games. And it's such a small and cute version too. Like, I have a Switch, but I also want the pink Switch Lite, which is dumb because I have a Switch, but like, I mean, I'm here for the gimmicks, okay? Just like that, Nintendo announced in September of 2020 that the 3DS will be discontinued. The era of the 3DS has been laid to rest. I mean, slowly but surely, a lot of like game stores like GameStop are removing the 3DS section. There's one GameStop I go to all the time where they had 2 shelves worth of 3DSs. I went there the other day and it's only 1 shelf. The top shelf is for 3DS games, and the bottom shelf is for the DS games. They don't even sell the consoles anymore. You can't find consoles anymore unless you go on eBay or Amazon. It's kind of sad to see Nintendo pull the plug on a console that I personally grew up on, but I mean, not to be cliche here, but that's life, that's technology. As technology progresses, there's going to be discontinuations of certain technologies that don't really hold up to today's standards anymore. And honestly, I understand. I've had a 3DS longer than I've had a Switch, but I've played the Switch more than I've had my 3DS. So I guess that's pretty telling on my end what I prefer to game on more, and that's the Switch. So, going back to my question from earlier, does this mean that this is the end of the era of handhelds? It's clear as day that Nintendo still depends off of the usage of handhelds because that's what they made for 30 years. Nintendo still relies on the handheld aspect of the Switch. That's the selling point of the Switch. What would make the Switch different from all the other home consoles? Well, besides the, exclusive titles, the fact that you can take it anywhere. That's what makes it sellable and cool and appealing to a lot of families. And not just families, individuals as well. I mean, like I said, they made a Switch Lite, and that's just a handheld version only of the Switch. There's just not gonna be a 3DS anymore, and no more clamshell design. And honestly, I think that's what makes Nintendo such a successful company. They're not afraid of taking risks. They're not afraid of trying new things with their own products. Actually ends up working out for them, even if they have a moment where it doesn't, like the Wii U, and it just looks weird and it feels weird and people are not really into it. But hey, I mean, they tried it, they failed, and then they did it again with the Switch and they're doing awesome. So props to Nintendo. Anyways, losers, that's all for today. Let me know in the comments down below what you guys think about the 3DS being discontinued. Are you gonna miss it? Any memories? Do you really care, not care? Do you think the Switch and the Switch Lite is a better replacement for the 3DS? Let me know. And don't forget to like, comment, and if you haven't joined the Losers Club, go ahead and click that subscribe button. What you waiting for, huh? Do it. Anyway, losers, I'll see you next time. Bye.